Okay, good. Looks like we're live. Yay.
We're live.
Well, Chairman, why don't we start again from the top?
We'll start again. We'll call the meeting to order, and the first order of business is the review of the minutes. If there are no corrections, we will accept them as written. Now, I can step back. Yes.
I need to read a statement.
I know. The statement. Go right ahead.
Until further notice, meetings of the Skokie Public Safety Commission will be held electronically, with a majority of village officials and commissioners participating via remote access in order to comply with the State of Illinois Gubernatorial Disaster Proclamation. Members of the public who wish to comment as to an item on the published agenda or to comment during public comments must submit their statement or question in writing to the village manager's office, and all properly submitted statements or questions will be presented and read during the relevant portion of the meeting. Written comments may be submitted by email to citizencomments@skokie.org, by mail to Village of Skokie, Village Manager's Office, 5127 Oakton Street, Skokie, Illinois, 60077, or via the village's drop box located by the public entry to Skokie Village Hall.
Thank you. Now we're going to turn the meeting back over to you.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you all for being in attendance this evening. Tonight is finally the night for you to talk amongst yourselves. As a group, we've heard many comments since this process actually launched in earnest in October of 2020. You've received the transcripts of the meetings, seen all the documents. The links to the videos for all of the meetings are posted on the village website and are available on YouTube. So tonight is the night for you as a group, both certainly the public safety commissioners and the human relations commissioners who are participating, to discuss what you've heard from the participating community members and what I hope to walk away with tonight. And I want to talk a little bit about the timetable, and I'll get into more detail before we wrap up tonight. But what I hope to walk away with tonight is some good, solid notes on what your priorities are based on what you've heard and what is important to you as a group that we reflect in the recommendation that will go to the village board likely in July, and what is important to each of you individually. So I'm going to open the floor to whoever would like to start. I certainly have some thoughts, but this is up to you. This is up to the commissioners to decide what you want to include in this report, very important report that will go to the village board. So Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, I don't know if either of you have anything to add.
No, I am as anxious to hear from everybody on the commission as you are.
Chief Baker, Max, Chief Hoflick, anything from the three of you? Okay.
Nothing specific, no, thanks.
Okay.
Not right now.
So the floor is open.
No one's saying anything.
I'm going to start calling on you.
Okay.
Don't make me call on you.
I know there's opinions here. I've heard a lot of opinions. I've agreed with a lot of opinions in the last few sessions. I actually listened to all of the recordings over again this weekend while I was going about my chores. I caught things that I didn't catch the first time. So I'm glad I did that. So I liked, there were suggestions to add language to encourage de-escalation when possible, when reasonable for an officer to do so, provided that it doesn't lead to any situations that would endanger their lives or the lives of other people. As well as language encouraging duty to intervene. But there was an idea that I didn't hear discussed. And I wanted to talk about that. People and our officers chimed in on the reasonableness, the use of force. I don't think we should change the perspective. There's lots of case law on that it come from the reasonable officer. But within the policy, it talks in the beginning and later about, at the beginning, it talks about a split second moment to moment events that can unfold, which is what we saw when we were able to experience the simulator training last year, that situations can unfold rapidly. I would like to propose, sorry, it's my cat, a sick cat, I'm isolating her. I would like to propose that we consider adding a totality of evidence statement that encourages reasonableness to be considered from the entire encounter and sequence of events. Our officers again and again, and board members talked about how we de-escalate. They talk about how that's part of the training and done when possible to do so. I'd just like to, instead of changing the scope, which I think might have unintended consequences, just broaden the lens of what's reasonable. And if possible, to add language to encourage to consider whether the officer tried to de-escalate if it was feasible to do so without reasonably leading to loss of life or bodily harm. That's all.
Thank you, Alicia. Anyone else have thoughts they'd like to share? Okay, I'll throw in a few of my ideas. Maybe this will get the discussion going. There were some predominant themes throughout each of the sessions. And when I reflect, the first thing that comes to my mind is training. You know, there was in every single discussion, starting with the one in October, where, you know, the real, what was, you know, intended to be the learning session for our participating community members and our human relations commissioners as well, who have kindly joined us in this process. But in every single discussion, training was discussed over and over and over again. And particularly with a focus toward, you know, the CIT training and a focus towards de-escalation and mental health, situational awareness. So that is one of the predominant themes as I reflect on it. Any comments on that, and how, any thoughts on how you think, how you would like the report to portray that, to reflect what we heard from the community members?
Took myself off mute because I'm trying to be quiet and let others have the floor. But I agree with you, Anne, that training came up over and over and over again. And what I heard was we do a lot of training. Clearly, we do very good training. I mean, I think we have to preface this by saying that the Village of Skokie Police Department seems to be operating very well. I don't think we have some of these problems that we're hearing about other places. So I want to acknowledge that and say that, you know, good job overall. But because we've been tasked to look at this policy, I think we need to come back with some recommendations. Even if the recommendations are to make no changes, we need to be able to say something. So to that end, it was heard loud and clear from the community that the training to address de-escalation and to address cultural sensitivity, this is very important that this get in here somehow. But what we heard was that we do a lot of training and there's so many requirements by the state already that there isn't an opportunity necessarily to incorporate these. And even, but there was a suggestion to incorporate by taking small pieces that are of importance and build that into the existing training so that those important points can be, as I say, incorporated to existing training so you don't have to have more training. But somehow we need to get that in there, because if we don't, we are doing a disservice, because it was stated by the community over and over, and that was the voice of the community to have these aspects of training addressed. I
really appreciate that perspective, David, and you're right in terms of the, you know, I'm sure Chief Baker will have thoughts on this, but the idea of adding, a 30-minute or 60-minute module to an existing training versus, a few different trainings, half-day trainings or whatever that are already in process and planned, rather than having a separate additional training might, again, the chief will know, but could be feasible. So thank you, David, for reminding us of that, because that was discussed and brought up at one point. I think probably even Chief Brian, you might have brought it up. Any other thoughts on training?
Somebody else was trying to speak.
I'm sorry. If you want to speak, please just unmute yourself.
I don't know if this falls within training or not, but, and I know, and forgive me if this was somehow brought up in all of this and I missed it, but it seems to me that, and maybe Chief Baker can address this, what kind of mental health, not training, but
Support?
Support are we offering our officers themselves? I mean, this is obviously an incredibly stressful job. If I assume that the police department does offer this, and if not, what could we do to offer this for our officers?
So currently, we have several different programs, if you will, that kind of support the mental health aspect and emotional well-being of our officers. The village has a employees assistance program that they participate with, and that's available to all employees. It's available to all police officers, and it's free of charge. Anyone can call. It's totally confidential. So anyone having any issue whatsoever can utilize that service. In addition to that, we have developed at the police department and have had in place for a few years now a peer support program. It's very formalized. We have a policy for it. We have a group of peer supporters that have been trained, and that's really the day-to-day backbone of that does the work of kind of keeping everybody balanced, if you will. They do a ton of work behind the scenes with individual officers on all different kinds of issues, and if things even get serious, they get very involved in helping them get further support, whether it's through EAP or somewhere else. That's really a good, well-established program. We now have other departments coming to us to learn about how we do it. And then lastly, we have a pretty good, solid chaplain program. So we have 2 chaplains that serve the police department. They come by, they connect with people, people connect with them, and they're there for support as well. So those are the 3 outlets we currently have, and I would say it works really well. And we have had discussions recently with risk management about the possibility of annual well-being kind of check-ins, if you will, just to make sure everyone's doing okay. And then in the new law that just took effect, the Safety Act that was passed, in there they actually talk about and mandate that ILETSB develop annual mandates for mental health. So those are coming, but they're not developed yet. Did that answer your question, Mark?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it. Now, do you feel like there's anything else, I mean, in your opinion, that could be done? I know you have limited time, limited resources, limited budget, but if you had like a wish list or anything?
Actually, the one wish I do have is an annual check-in, just to make sure that people are okay, just like going to the doctor, right? You go to the doctor every year, we pay for physicals just to make sure people are physically okay. We should do the same thing from a mental health perspective. So if we get that, I think we're sitting in a really good place.
Thank you. Appreciate the feedback there.
You're welcome.
Maybe that in a police department golden retriever. How about that? Okay.
Spa day.
I'm sorry?
Spa day.
Yeah, there you go. Mark, thank you for that. Leslie has her hand up.
Thank you. As I've had a chance to reflect on all the conversations that we've had since September and listen to the feedback and concerns of the public, so much of it, from my perspective, has truly been driven by the national perception of police. And what I've appreciated is that not once did I hear a negative example of an experience that a citizen had with the Skokie Police Department. It makes me a proud citizen to live in the city with the type of police department that we do have. But I do think that because I feel so much of it, of the feedback has been driven by national perception, I think it's important that we do our best to change the perception of what the community may have of the police to make it as positive as possible. Meaning maybe we, have a director of community relations. I don't know. I know it sounds like we may have someone who serves several different purposes and has kind of a hybrid position, but maybe you have one position like a director of community relations that's real purpose is develop the division on how the community perceives the police and how we can market them in a positive light. The other thing that I was thinking about is some of the examples we gave during the meetings of maybe we change the color of police uniforms, maybe we change the color of police cars. I know we talked about the mobile unit and how it goes to certain areas of the community and why that's on hold. I understand that's due to COVID, but doing more things like that. I also know that from my husband, who has traveled to Canada, when he crossed the border into Windsor, Canada, they had public service officers. And these aren't individuals that are have any role within law enforcement, but they walk around in bright safety jackets around like the downtown area, and they serve as an arm for the public to provide information or to get assistance here and there, just so the public isn't always relying on the police for 411, and we can truly rely on the police for emergency situations. So those are some thoughts that I have. We just need to build structures to really reinforce community trust.
Thank you, Leslie. Trust was another one of the themes that, another one of the predominant themes in our discussions. You know what? Bear with me for a second. I think I thought I was letting Amy, here, there she is, okay. Rabbi Amy Memes Fuller has just joined us. So thank you, Leslie. Melissa has her hand up.
So in this theme of trust, I've also read through a lot of the transcripts and was reflecting on the experiences. And I think what also goes hand in hand in that is transparency. Yeah. And so I think it was really like reading through everything, like people were really interested in seeing the data and like understanding like where to find things on the website. Or we do all these really wonderful trainings, but if you went to the website, would we even know that police are getting like hours upon hours of like use of force training or implicit bias training? Because if we're one of the top police departments like in our state, then I think it would be really helpful to really advertise that. So for the community, there's a lot of trust in knowing that our police are getting trained on these topics, and when use of force happens, or the statistics are out there and they're on the website, so you can actually see like how many people, who's affected, so you don't have to data dive in some ways. And so I think increasing transparency, or like having it be a little bit easier to maneuver through like the website, whatever that might be. And if we have a community relations officer or whatever like position that is, it could be that role, because that it's that person's perspective, like sort of perspective and role to be able to think about like how to make data accessible, how to make this information accessible to the community. And I think that would help a lot of the perception and trust.
I think the Village of Skokie in general does a really good job with transparency. If you go on their main website page, you'll see information that a lot of towns might not not show unless you get some sort of, is it FOIA, if I'm saying that correctly? Mm-hmm. It's all right there in front. And to go off Melissa, I think I agree with that. If there was some way we could, and we've discussed that quite a bit, as you point out, that we could get some of that within the police department too, as we do within the village itself. I know that it's part of the village, but and you see, do you understand what I'm saying when I say that?
I do. I absolutely do. And I appreciate your comments, Mark. The police department webpage is indeed a function of Skokie.org, but that's something that's new. That just started right after the first of the year. For several years, the police department had its sort of its own website. It was connected, but it was its own, but it has now actually been umbrellaed under the Skokie.org. That said, it is always such a challenge to present information in a way that residents don't have to dig for it. I mean, that was part of what I was thinking when I created that page just for this project, to try to make it, a central place for residents to go. But that said, Melissa, your point is very well taken. There's always more that we can do. Again, I always think of maybe we need some more new Skokie articles about training, and those articles could be cataloged on the police department website. So yes, there is as transparent as I believe we are, and as we strive to be, there's always a way to, we need to look at packaging the information to make it easy to navigate and easily accessible to the community. So it's definitely something that we can work on. So thank you. Linda.
Hi, good evening, everybody. So I have a couple of follow-ups just on actually a few things that have been said already. David, I totally agree with you. I was really impressed by the amount of training, what the police do already in terms of their training, in terms of their procedures. I was moved emotionally with the 3 officers, with their perspectives on things. And I think the bottom line is to also realize that they're people, and they're doing the best for our community. And we do have to develop that trust that apparently has been broken by the country. So I think that actually we do a really good job on a lot of points, and we have to be careful not to put limitations on them. They spoke really sincerely about not saying never do this, with certain aspects of what is included in the law and in the papers, in the new law that has been passed, in terms of use of force. I think it's important for us to realize that as we go through, that 8 can't wait. There were a lot of things in there that some people were advocating for, I think, more stringent language. And I think as we have to be careful what we recommend, I think that the police can really do their job. I also agree on the transparency. The other side to that is the public needs to know, but like you said, Anne, how do we get the public to log on and look, right? So we can do the new Skokie, we can do that, but there's only really a percentage of people, I think, that have the interest and are going to look. I don't know how that expands. It's like with anything, right? You put a newsletter out and people who are interested are going to look. I tuned into the Monday night board meeting, and I think it was mentioned that we need to look at the police policy. And I thought it was interesting because we are looking at the police policy, and I can't remember who said that, honestly. But whoever had said that, I think it was actually one of the comments from one of the residents. So we can say, public safety is looking at this, but there's still a lot of people that don't know that. I don't know how to get it out there, but it's important to get it out there that, we're doing a good job. So that's all for now.
Thank you, Linda.
Sure.
Can I
Alicia?
piggyback on that? Linda, I completely agree with you that I wish people were more involved, or that the message got to them more. I wish that there was more public trust. And I sometimes get frustrated when members of the public don't seem to know what we're trying to do. But I just want to I want to include all of the citizen comments in today's discussion. There were calls for us to lead nationally a few times, which Skokie has a history of doing. And while nobody in particular had a negative comment of the Skokie police, I certainly have had exemplary experiences with them whenever I've talked to any officers. But I just want to keep in mind that we do have data that suggests that there is disproportionate use of force against African Americans. Now, we talked about this and we don't know how it compares nationally. I think that that was mentioned in an early meeting that there is a national, people are trying to get a handle on national statistics for use of force, but a different places will define force differently, and Skokie is very stringent in its use of force. And so while our use of force incidents are low every year, Black people who only make up 6% of the Skokie population, we're having 40% of the use of forces against them. So I just want to keep the citizens' comments a part of this, that everybody has room for improvement. I think that Skokie is great, but we can still push for improvements with the policy. Maybe that would help keep the engagement that we're looking for.
Thank you, Alicia.
So when we talked about training specifically, I talked about anti-bias training, de-escalation, and then on a separate issue was talked about culture and leadership within the department. And I don't know how we identify or talk about that to the board in terms of making a recommendation. I don't know, but I highlighted that. The other thing I just wanted to bring up is there was several points brought up by Skokie United, and they talked about what they wanted to see in there. And they said there was a working document. I don't know if they've made, I haven't looked at it recently. I'm going to be open, but if they've got a recommendation, I think that they came to our meeting and they told us what they were looking for, that we really do need to put that into whatever we're presenting to the mayor and the board. We need to include that. A couple of things they put in specifically, they said they wanted a section on minimal reliance on force that includes alternatives to use of force, and then clearer language on resistance level of a subject. They made a few key points. I'm not a police officer. Joel Reyes commented on that a bit and said what we don't want to do is we don't want to bind the policeman in any way. So we need to be cautious about the wording that's put into this, because as Linda just said, they do a good job and we want to provide them still the flexibility that they have to do their job. So, I think we need the police's, you're part of the Chief Baker's part, and the police department is part of this commission as well. So we really need your thoughts on where you'd like to see some of these changes in the document itself, kind of like you even mentioned on the mental health and annual checkup. This is our opportunity for an annual checkup of this use of force and what tweaks need to be made. I don't think there's any major things, but what tweaks need to be made in here so that this becomes a healthier document and a more, there was a call for transparency as well to, what things should be released to the community in terms of release of information. We already do it, but is there something more that needs to be edited? I don't think we heard any comment that needs sweeping reform of this document. I think it's all minor edits. But we should be specific about what those minor edits are. I mean, we should be very clear, because they asked for continuum of force to be more clearly defined. And there was discussion on that as well. And again, I'm not an officer. I don't know what, when I say this, I don't really know quite what that means, but I think we need to have some specific bullets, recommendations, so that those that are aware of what these words mean can help to modify the policy so that it includes these suggestions where appropriate.
David, was that outside of the 8 can't wait that you're talking about?
It was part of the 8 can't wait discussion.
So, when we talked about the 8 can't wait, there were things within the 8 can't wait that Chief Baker said that he felt that could be implemented if they're not already implemented. There were things that the police officers said that, as you pointed out, David, would be kind of binding, would kind of hold. We don't want to hold. We want to be able to give them. Did I just lose?
Oh, you're there.
You're here.
Sorry, my screen just went blank.
Oh.
There were things that they said that the Chief Baker said that we could probably tweak if they're not already within our policy, and there are things that would probably be we want to give them flexibility as well. We don't want to. Well, I'm trying to think of an example. For example, the don't shoot at a moving car. There was an example given if that car was, going to be was coming towards a crowd, things like that. So I think, David, what you're saying is that we probably should nail down what the police feel that they can work with, and things they feel that they can't, and then we need to kind of decide whether we agree with that in some way, shape, or form as well. Does that make sense?
Yep, agree.
I think as the report comes together and the recommendation comes together, we're going to have to really go back and take a close look at 8 can't wait at those different tenants. I think that's going to require a lot of study as we put the report together over the next few weeks. Okay, who's next? Other thoughts?
May I?
Yes, please.
So,
Karen.
regard to building trust and the 8 can't wait, is there room? Because I don't remember hearing much discussion about any of the more recent research in the academic literature from the last few years about what works and what doesn't work. Which of the 8 can't wait policies that have been put in place in other jurisdictions have proven to actually be effective in accomplishing the goals of reducing unnecessary force and, improving the relationship with the community and increasing public trust. And I do agree that I think a lot of the concern has got to be driven more by national issues, because by and large, we're doing pretty well, but we could do better. And if there is something out there that we're not doing that is in fact very effective and has been demonstrated to be effective of, say, within the 8 can't wait policies, maybe that should be one of the things we consider in tweaking the use of force policy.
Thank you. Howard.
I think my thoughts are more about process than about specifics. Here's what I'm struggling with. The people who spoke at the meeting, at the various meetings, they weren't a random sample of citizens, and they weren't anyone who wanted to show up to the meeting. They raised points, their concerns, and I think we should think about their concerns. But I don't think that as a rule, we should make it our job to implement their concerns just because those were the concerns. I think that to the extent that we want to make changes in a way that would restrict the conduct of police officers in a conflict situation, I think we really need to rigorously study it before, at least in my position, but I would need to really rigorously study these ideas at greater depth before I felt comfortable making a recommendation. I think that just comments, even if multiple people made those comments, I just don't think they're sufficient for me to be comfortable making that recommendation, given the gravity of, you know, potentially life and death situations that we're thinking about.
Thank you. Just to remind everyone, and I'm going to get into more about this later, but just to remind you of part of the process is going to be that the first cut of the report, the first draft of the report, will be posted on the village website for a minimum of 3 weeks for community comment. Unfortunately, because we extended by a month, which was valuable. I mean, last month's discussion with members of the Skokie Police Department was an extremely valuable component of this process. But doing so pushed our calendar, our timeline out a month, and it got us off sync with the new Skokie publication schedule. That said, in the addition of new Skokie that arrives in your home, will arrive in your homes around May 1st, there is an article that talks about this process, and it mentions that the use of the draft policy will be posted on the website in coming weeks. So, you know, even though we can't say it's up, go look at it, there was, you know, the community was alerted that it is going to be up, and we will publicize it, you know, extensively in the electronic newsletter and on the website. So we will be asking for broader community comments on that initial draft. So just a reminder that that is going to be part of the process. The chairman has his hand up.
Thank you, Ann. I would just like, I listened to everybody's opinions at all these meetings and tonight, and I would like to point out one thing. No matter how many laws and rules and regulations and training we do, and we do a lot of it, and how many court cases there are, that rules we have to follow, policing is a gray area in that there's an infinite number of possibilities that may occur on the street. And my opinion, for what it's worth, is that the use of force simply has to be commensurate with the individual that the officer is dealing with. And simply put, a term we haven't used, and that is common sense. A well-trained officer with good common sense should be able to do what we are going to ask them to do. But how do you teach common sense? I don't know. That's something that has to come from within. And I would like the report to reflect some words in that, to that respect, when we start writing it. Thank you, Ann.
Duly noted. Other thoughts, comments? Okay, no one's jumping in, so I'd like to throw out, you know, we've talked about, oh, I'm sorry, who has their hand up? Oh, Joel, forgive me, I did not see your hand. Go ahead.
That is quite all right. Yeah, so let me take my hand down here. I'm sorry. You know, listening to some of this, and in terms of the national issue with policing and our policy. So, and looking at the most recent, you know, case in Minnesota, if based on the way statute is now, Supreme Court ruling is now, if our policy, would our policy have prevented something like that happened in Minnesota based on that person's actions? And I guess what I mean is, policy existed, laws existed, and there was still that heinous act by the officer, which ended up having him found guilty of all crimes. That policy itself, the police department's policy, had no effect on his behavior. So whatever change is made in this policy, and that's why I agree, we have to be careful when we start putting things like, 8 Can't Wait wants to require this, that says you cannot shoot at moving vehicles ever, that you have to ban chokeholds. Illegal behavior is illegal behavior. Illegal behavior is always a violation of policy. So when we look at changing policy, instead of, in my opinion, looking at things where it's already established in law, because if we create a reasonable standard here and a reasonable standard here, which one is more reasonable? How are we going to judge the officer later? Are we going to judge that officer based on the court's view of reasonable or the village's version of reasonable? So looking at policy, transparency is huge. So that's something I think we could add, because transparency is about saying this is what we're doing, why we're doing it, and in the process we go through. Training is huge, because that gets us from A to B, and like the chairman was saying, it's common sense. Well, common sense is really just a lot of experience and some logic. So the more training we get and the more experience we get, we apply that learned behavior, right? That common sense in how we approach things. We become more familiar with situations. We become more familiar with our own feelings when we're trying to address a volatile situation, so we can approach it better. So I think in my opinion, looking at this policy and looking at more than just the use of force policy, but the whole culture of the police department, if it's already established as a reasonable standard, and it's obvious that, the catalyst for a lot of this is that unreasonable behavior that at this moment in time would be a violation of policy and statute, is it really necessary to start putting all that in there to make two standards versus just putting in the things that we can do to ensure that an officer has everything he or she needs to be successful and making good decisions and having this culture of care to the community and transparency?
Thank you, Joel. Melissa.
I have a comment around common sense. I think we should be careful on how we use that term as well, because part of the reason why implicit bias training is so important, is all of us walk around thinking that we do have common sense. And it is your lived experiences and you're approaching a situation just sort of based on what sorts of biases you might already have. And so I think a lot of people on these calls have talked about the importance of really not just cultural sensitivity, but actual bias training. Because what you think is your common sense might be skewed by a certain sort of worldview that you might not even know you have. So I just wanted to point that out, just sort of thinking about language and that. And also, just unrelated to all of that, I know a lot of legislation was just passed. I think it would be helpful when we come up with our document that the community looks at to sort of note what's already going to be coming through the pipeline, sort of highlight why we didn't spend so much time talking about body cameras or anonymous reporting or whatever it is. It seemed like there was a lot of comprehensive legislation that was passed that we didn't have to bring into a lot of our discussions because it's already going to happen. And so whatever the document is, maybe just highlighting because of XX law passed on this date, these things are going to be added to the policy as well. In addition to that, as a community, this is what we're also going to do on top of that, because we feel that as a value system, or we value this, and this is what the community said. So just putting that in the document.
Thank you. I'm just perfecting my note here.
Okay.
Thanks, Melissa. Okay, I hope I'm not missing anyone's hands. Let me look at Paul. Paul?
Thank you. I want to thank Melissa and Joel, because they both use terms that are very interesting. A simple term, the word reasonable. It is probably the most undefinable term you could think of. It's always what ultimately a court may rule on what is reasonable. What is reasonable to you may not be reasonable to me or to anybody else. It's hard to define. So to use it as setting a standard, what is reasonable, I think is not definable.
Thank you. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands. So I'd like to now just pose for the group. We've talked a lot about training. We've talked about transparency. I'd like to talk a little bit more about trust and in terms of community engagement. I think that's a very, we heard, especially I'm mindful of our February conversation where we were fortunate enough to have Ovi Banerjee, who was a senior, I believe, at Niles West, who, spoke about how really fortunate he felt to be, believed he was to have been part of this initiative, and just having conversations between youth in the community and the police might be helpful. So that's just one example of some community engagement that could be very valuable, and I think would be very valuable. Any thoughts about how community, what we should say, or how this report should characterize the commission's thoughts on community engagement, again, as it relates to trust?
I guess I can start if no one's talking.
Please go ahead, Joel.
So when we look at a department, any of our departments, whether it be fire, whether it be police, public works, engineering, they all exist for one reason, and that reason is to serve, right? They all exist to serve the community. And there's no more important purpose than that. And a big part of that is building those partnerships. So we talk about training. Training is what? Training is about getting better so we can serve the community better. We talk about transparency. Transparency is so we can serve the community better. And those partnerships that we developed are more important because it shows that officers are just like everyone else. They're living, breathing people with emotions. They make mistakes. They have issues at home. They have financial things they have to deal with. They put their pants on the exact same way. And I think it's vitally important for every single one of our departments to show the community that's who they are, that they are human beings and they have emotions. And we saw it with the officers that came out and spoke, and you can see how they're emotionally affected by everything that's going on. That does not serve the community well. When somebody hesitates mentally or somebody does not feel appreciated, and you can take this to a school environment and the idea of safety in the school and friendships and the social aspect and self-esteem. If you don't feel appreciated, you're less effective. Your development is delayed, and there's a difficulty establishing and maintaining these relationships. So when we look at our police department, I think one of the biggest things that we need to work on, and as a Public Safety Commission, how can we support these departments in establishing better partnerships within the community?
Thank you, Joel.
along the lines of trust, my wife is a teacher, and I, forgive me, I don't recall exactly the programs that were in elementary schools or are still in elementary schools. So I got the impression from my wife, who was an elementary school teacher, that the program or programs that were at elementary schools are no longer taking place. I don't know if that's the case or not. And hopefully Chief Baker can address this. But when I think of community engagement and trust, I think about our children. And I'm wondering what we're doing or what we could do to, children are sponges. They take a lot of things on. They take everything on. Everything we say, you think they're not listening, but they're listening. What are we doing? What could we do in the schools with police to engage children with police to make them feel more comfortable with police? So those are just some thoughts. And again, if Chief Baker, if you have any thoughts about that in schooling.
Oh, well, I think developing relationships with the youth in our community is extremely important for us and for the village, right? They had the DARE program for years. It went away after it was proven to not really be effective in achieving what it was trying to achieve. But one of the things it did do was establish some of those relationships. So we continued with a program called SAFE. We have an officer that goes to the elementary schools on a regular basis and talks to them about different subjects and develops relationships at a young age. We have school resource officers that are currently in the junior highs and high schools. Some of those are under review and may not continue. There are other aspects of ways that we can engage youth outside of the schools, which we're going to have to probably start exploring. It's a very needed item, but the only formal program that we have is the SAFE program and the school resource officer program, as well as our Explorer program. We do have an Explorer program that's founded through the Boy Scouts of America, and we have that as well. But other than that, it's mostly officers just having conversations with families and kids as they go through their normal day.
Thank you, Chief Baker. Is that SAFE program is ongoing and does visit all Skokie elementary schools currently?
That is correct.
Thank you.
Was that Officer Jacobson?
Used to be. It's Officer Wilkin now. Rich Wilkin.
Yeah. The reason I remember, because I know my kids know who Officer Jacobson is because of that program. And so, I mean, it's what you're saying, Mark, is true. And it's unfortunate if we're not having it going on, but you said the SAFE is going on. So
yeah, it was halted obviously for COVID and all that, but it's picking back up. So.
Yeah. And then the same thing that was halted and hopefully comes back, the mobile unit. And I know that there was some concern that somebody in the community said, maybe that's not comfortable to have that showing up in our neighborhood. But I think that the response overall was a positive one, if I'm correct. I mean, didn't we do surveys after this and we found that the people enjoyed having the vehicle there? I think that would be something we should start back up again too. Edie used to go to these almost every time. So I don't know if you have thoughts on that.
I could share my observation. I think that the kids especially loved it. And I saw some really good connections between police officers and kids, as they showed them, as they toured them around the cop mobile, as I call it. So I did not see hesitation with the kids about enjoying the cop vehicle. Maybe some of their parents were more hesitant, but I did not see that with the kids in the neighborhood at all.
A couple of the things that made that program, I feel, run well was the fact that the Skokie Park District was also involved, and they would have cookouts along with the cops vehicle. The village also provided like games, little games and prizes and so forth. So I think that also was a good integral part of that program.
I'm also mindful, I think it was our Public Safety Commissioner Cornell Collins, forgive me if I'm misquoting or if I'm misremembering, but when I was reading through the transcripts again last week before I sent them out to everyone, I think you were quoted as having talking about the beat officer in your neighborhood. Am I remembering that correctly? Yeah, that there was a beat officer that was very influential in you. And I think there's, I think Chief Baker's done a great job with the beat program, but I'm wondering if in terms of engaging children, if there's more that we can do.
I would, may I comment? I would hope so, because as I told Chief Baker this story numerous times, which really did happen. I have a young grandson, and one day when he was about 6 years old, I asked him if he knew the difference between a policeman and a fireman. His reply was that yes, the fireman saves you and the policeman arrests you. And that was a 6-year-old. I hope that by now he's figured it out, but the training and teaching in school is a heck of a good idea.
Other thoughts on community engagement? Okay, I just want to make sure that I'm not missing anyone. Before I go into sort of the final recap of the process from here out, I would just like to once again open the floor if anyone has any other thoughts that they would like to share with the group this evening about the process, the reports. Alicia.
I didn't want to overspeak, so I'm going to take my hand down. There are people that we haven't heard from on this commission, but I think that when we were talking about the 8-can-wait, I don't know how to take this hand down. What is wrong with me? I can't take this. I have 2 hands now. I'm so sorry. I think that the feedback on some of the 8-can't-wait ideas, there were, and I think this is already in the policy. I read it, and I think that there's already in the policy to encourage a verbal warning before using use of force when possible to do so, and if it's possible to do so in a way that wouldn't endanger anybody. And then there was also, I think the chief mentioned that there was policy for duty to intervene that is in other policies, again, with a cautious tone, but that could be pulled forward into this policy and make it a comprehensive policy. Please correct me if I'm misremembering.
You are correct, yes.
To Alicia's point, there's others on the commission that do have more of a law enforcement background. And if any of you have some comments, it would be really nice to hear, because you've got a different perspective than some of the others of us on this that heard some of the comments, but would appreciate your thoughts on some of these things.
Thank you, David. I'm going to open the floor to Rabbi Memes Fuller now, who has her hand up.
Hi, thank you. Just back to the community question, I don't know how soon the village is going to be encouraging block parties, but when we have had block parties, one of the nice pieces was often police officers would attend. Sometimes it was by invitation of the host block, but if that happens again, to incorporate that as part of the culture of block parties as a way to get to know our neighbors. And if it could be even the beat police officer who's connected with that neighborhood visits the block, even better. That was for you, Karen.
Thank you for that. There's an article again in the May-June edition of New Skokie about block parties. The good news is that block parties are encouraged. The difficult piece of it is that because we are still in phase 4 of the reopening for the state of Illinois, the the village really can't condone any gatherings of more than 50 people because that's not within what the state guidelines are right now. And at present, the idea of the police and fire visiting the block parties remains on hold. But we all just, we're all hoping that conditions will allow us to resume that soon. But thank you for mentioning that. Alex Chaparro.
Yeah, sorry guys, my camera is not working today. I dropped my laptop. But anyhow, one of the things that really struck me, especially coming from the Human Relations Commission, was the perception of diversity and inclusion in the force itself, and wanting to see that the force was reflective of the community. And I heard from Chief Baker, and I see the diversity in the force. I just was struck that was a concern, and I don't know if that's something that's that can be directly addressed in our use of force policy, but I think it's something that we should be cognizant of, and or that more outreach to the community to illustrate that is necessary. Because if it's there and it's being lost, that they're not seeing it or they're not feeling it, I think it's something either a challenge for us to tackle, or an opportunity to illustrate and showcase the diversity that we have in Skokie. But I heard that, and just being on the other commission, it was just something that resonated with me. And I think it's just something. There's so many things that we have to bring to the table, and so many things to consider in putting this together. But I think that's just something that I heard, and I hope that there's some way that we can address it.
Thank you, Alex. Before I recognize Melissa, because she has her hand up, I want to just mention that starting with the July-August edition of New Skokie, I'm planning a new feature that will include probably a minimum of 2, up to a maximum of 4 profiles of village staff, not just from the police department, but from all departments, to really demonstrate the fact that our workforce does reflect the diversity and the demographics of the community. So stay tuned on that. Melissa.
I was just going to say that I think that's going to be a fantastic idea, like having more profiles, because the person I think who mentioned that there was concern about a lack of diversity was referring to the fact, I think there was like some publication where all the beat officers happened to just be all white of like potentially a certain age, like not quite sure, but that's all they saw. Then I think Chief Baker or someone talked about how it's like to become a beat officer, you're going to be of a certain generation, but like the younger generation of the police force is a more diverse, like that's reflection of the community. So I think when you're going to do these profiles and having it more and talking about like publicity or just education, I think it's going to be really helpful for the community to see that it really is a diverse workforce.
Yeah, I'm actually very excited about launching that initiative. Okay, any other hands? Anyone else who we haven't heard from who would like to speak? Is there anyone that, I guess the last question I would ask, we've talked about training, we've talked about transparency, we've talked about trust. I've got 6 pages of notes here just from tonight already. I write large. But is there anything else that any of you, just before pen gets put to paper to write this draft, that is just extremely important to you to be included? Anything else that anyone would like to just put out for the good of the conversation? Okay. Seeing none and seeing no hands, I want to make sure I'm not missing anyone. I'd like to just recap by talking about the rest of the process. So, pardon me while I just shift a couple things around on my desk. I want to pull out my calendar so I can be precise with some dates. There is a small group of commissioners from the Public Safety Commission, Alicia Case, Dennis Rizzo, our Vice Chairman, Mark Penning, along with Karen Lee Sherman, who will represent the Human Relations Commission, that have agreed to assist and to really work on developing the draft. We want this work product to really be a product, not just for my office, as someone asked way in the beginning. It certainly will ultimately come from my office, but it needs to really be the commission's work. So I'm grateful to the commissioners who will work with Chief Baker and myself on developing the first draft. That said, this small group is going to be very busy for the next few weeks. Those of you who are in the small group know you're going to be getting a scheduling email from me tomorrow, because what we need to do is to turn around a draft. I want to have it to the commission in time for consideration and discussion at the May 19th meeting. And the reason that date is, again, all of this can be flexible if we need it to. If for whatever reason, the consensus is that we need to kind of stop and slow down the process. But the reason that I believe it's important that the commission look at this first draft at the May 19th meeting is because of the promise that we made to the community that we would have the draft on the village website for a minimum of 3 weeks for just open comments from the public. And so let's just, again, staying on what I believe is the ideal timeline, if we can adhere to it. Commission meets on May 19th. You will have received the draft on Friday, the 14th of May. We'll discuss it on the 19th. I'll do my best to incorporate any edits, comments. I might need to, again, bring in the small group if needed. But ideally, to post the draft on the village website no later than Monday, May 24th. That would give, so it would be on the website for the week of the 24th, the week of the 7th. Then the commission meets again. So that would be 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks. Yes, so the commission would meet again in June, on June 16th. So that way on June 16th, the commissioners could consider any public comments that came in. And you could talk about how or if you wanted to incorporate any ideas that were shared in the public comments into what would be the final draft. The final draft then will ideally be presented to the village board at either the July 5th or the July 19th village board meeting. And the village manager has already been alerted that that's a possibility. So that is, it's an ambitious, we've done a lot of listening. It's been a slow process and necessarily so, because there were a lot of opinions that we needed to hear. But now in the end, in order to just kind of get it across the finish line, that's the ambitious time frame. I do see a couple of hands. The first one I saw, the other thing I'd like to add before I go to recognize Joel and then Linda is that if any of you have any ideas, and thank you, Trustee Sutker, for sending me a message in the chat. If any of you have any ideas after tonight's meeting, don't hesitate to just shoot me an email, send them to me. I'm sure you all know you can always do that. So Joel, I'll recognize you, then Linda, you're next.
Yeah, hi, I just wanted to ask you, are we, so after this draft is presented and it's reviewed by the commission, are we going to go through a formal vote by the commission or recommendations or changes or approval to send to the Board of Trustees? Or is this something where we're just going to talk about it and then at some point it gets to their packet? So
I'm glad you asked that question, and I don't know that I have a definitive answer as I sit here this evening. I want to talk to the chair and the vice chair about that. In our work together over, I think it's been almost 7 years that I started becoming involved with the commission. And in our work together, we've not done a lot of up and down votes. You know, that's other than approving minutes. There's not been a lot of that. So my hope would be that just like we've had these discussions where there's seems to be consensus, my hope would be that there's consensus. If not, you know, maybe we would need to take an up-down vote. Again, I don't know that I see that happening, but I want to reserve. Again, Joel, what I want to really say is that I appreciate you raising that. If we need to put that in as part of the process, we can. I'm curious though as to your thought behind the suggestion or the query.
Well, I think everybody's voice is important, and I know that I may have a certain view, and I don't want that to drown out other people's voices. I think that we all have a perspective. We all have, you know, our implicit biases. We all have our life experiences. We all have everything that makes up who we are. But I also think if we're talking about transparency and we're talking about something as important as this, that it should be something that we really look at and put to a vote. Because this, if we don't, then it comes from the Public Safety Commission really without any closure. So I think to have closure and to have everyone on this commission, their voice heard, we really should go through that process. And then that gives the board, I guess you could say it gives it a little more weight, and maybe in that the community at large has said, okay, we've reviewed all this and this is what we have, and this is how we'd like to move forward. Now, obviously they could do whatever they want, but I think it's closure, and it sends a loud message.
And I'll answer one point. The last time we had a major issue before us was the landlord's issue in Skokie when they were putting the new ordinance in.
Right.
And we did take a vote on that very faithfully, and it was a unanimous vote before it was presented to the village board.
I thank you for that history, Paul. That predates my involvement with the commission. I've certainly been with the village.
I predate a lot of people.
No. I mean, I just wasn't. I was with the village then, but I wasn't involved with the Public Safety Commission. So thank you for that history. Who else had a hand up? Linda, I think.
Yeah, one of my points was Edie's point that I wanted to mention, you know, if somebody has an idea that wasn't brought up this evening, can we email you? And you thank you, Edie. My other question was the public comments. Are we going to see them before the meeting, or we're just going to see them at that time? You're going to just put them together. We'll review them then.
You will see them in advance. I think Linda, you know, again, if the timeline stays as I you know, laid it out this evening, what I would probably do is the agenda for the June 16th meeting would go out on, if we stay true to form, would go out on Friday, the 11th of June. So what I would likely do is catalog and send to everyone along with the agenda, everything, all the public comments that have come into that point. So you would have that weekend to view what's come into that point. Public comments would likely be closed by the 14th, so there might be a quick turnaround for whatever was received between the 11th and the 14th. You know, again, there's a chance, depending on how our discussion goes in May, that the document could be posted on the website on May 21st. You know, it might, you know, that we could move it up a little too if there aren't many edits that need to go into it. So there's some variables.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, I will do my best to get you as much as I can so that you have at least, I always think it's important for you to have at least one weekend where you can, you know, devote some time to it.
Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. Any other comments, questions? All right, thanks everybody. Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back over to you. And I'd like to thank Samantha Maximilian. This is Samantha's first evening at the controls. Our Trustee Eric Cook retired about 2 weeks ago, which is wonderful for him. But we appreciate Sam and all her efforts to run the show tonight. So thanks, Samantha.
Thank you, Ann. If there is any old business or new business anybody wants to bring to the table. If not, I will declare the meeting adjourned. Thank you very much for attending, everyone.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Thank you,
Thanks, everybody.
everybody.
Thank you.
Good night.
Night.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night.
Good evening.
Samantha, are you gonna take off the